Officer Ji-hoon Park was having a quiet evening with his wife Minji on Colony Station Alpha 7. They were walking through the main marketplace, looking at exotic alien fruits and strange gadgets from distant worlds. The station buzzed with activity as traders from dozens of species conducted business under the artificial sky. Minji laughed as she pointed at a vendor selling floating crystals that changed colors. "Look at those, honey. They're so beautiful." Her voice carried that same joy that had kept Ji-hoon sane during his darkest days in the war. Suddenly, 6 towering Vorthan security officers materialized from their cloaking devices. These crystalline beings stood 8 feet tall, their bodies made of what looked like living diamond. Their faces had no expressions, just glowing blue cores where eyes should be. Human female. The lead officer's voice burst like broken glass. "You have violated Regulation for 7B regarding pedestrian and movement patterns. You walked in a curved line instead of straight paths." Ji-hoon blinked in confusion. What? She was just looking at the shops. The Vorthan ignored him completely. Violation requires immediate neural correction. Before Ji-hoon could react, 3 officers raised weapons that looked like twisted metal rods. Blue energy crackled between them, and suddenly Minji screamed. Her body went rigid as electricity-like energy coursed through her nervous system. She collapsed to the metal floor, shaking uncontrollably. "Stop," Ji-hoon shouted, rushing toward his wife. She didn't do anything wrong. The lead Vorthan stepped between them, its crystalline hand easily the size of Ji-hoon's entire head. "Human emotional responses are irrelevant to compliance procedures. Your female will recover in 6 to 8 hours. Other shoppers in the marketplace had stopped to watch. Ji-hoon saw fear in their eyes. Humans, Altarians. Even some of the usually brave Korgan merchants. Everyone knew better than to challenge Vorthan authority. These beings controlled security from most of the outer colonies, and their justice was swift and brutal. Minji was still convulsing on the ground, foam appearing at the corners of her mouth. The neural disruptor was designed to overload the nervous system, causing pain levels that could drive most species insane. Ji-hoon had seen it used on prisoners during the war, and he knew some victims never fully recovered. Something cold settled in Ji-hoon's chest. It was the same feeling he'd experienced in the void between stars, floating in a damaged fighter craft with no backup coming. The feeling he'd had when facing down creatures that could crush starships with their bare hands. It was the calm that came right before he did something that would either save everyone or get them all killed. The Vorthan officer was already turning away, considering the matter closed. Its companions kept their weapons trained on the crowd, making sure no one interfered with their justice. Human pain responses are irrelevant to compliance procedures. The leader buzzed again. Almost bored, Ji-hoon stood up slowly. His movements, controlled and deliberate, round him. The marketplace had gone completely silent. Even the alien vendors had stopped their chattering. Something in Ji-hoon's posture made everyone take a step back. He'd learned this kind of patience during 3 years of guerrilla warfare against the Void Reapers. Those creatures could sense fear, anger, and desperation from miles away, but they couldn't read the cold determination of a human who had nothing left to lose. Ji-hoon had floated in dead space for weeks, eating emergency rations and drinking recycled water, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at enemy supply lines. The Vorthan security team was impressive by most standards. Their crystalline bodies could deflect most energy weapons, and their strength was legendary throughout the galaxy. They'd conquered dozens of worlds simply by walking onto the surface and announcing they were in charge now. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd hurt Minji in front of someone who'd spent years learning exactly how to kill things that seemed impossible to kill. Ji-hoon reached into his jacket pocket. moving slowly enough that the Vorthans wouldn't consider it threatening. His fingers found the small card he'd carried for 15 years but never used, the quantum encrypted identification that connected to military databases across the galaxy. The other humans in the marketplace were backing away now. They could sense something was about to happen. Though they didn't understand what, an elderly Korgan merchant was quietly herding his family toward the exit. Minji's convulsions were getting weaker. But she was still unconscious on the cold metal floor. A small pool of blood had formed where she'd bitten her tongue. Ji-hoon pulled out the card and held it where the Vorthan leader could see it, the crystalline being barely glanced in his direction. Clearly uninterested in whatever human bureaucracy the card represented, that was about to change. The air around Ji-hoon suddenly shimmered like heat waves rising from hot pavement. 6 more Vorthan warriors appeared out of nowhere, their advanced cloaking technology dissolving to reveal towering figures in midnight black combat armor. These weren't regular security officers. These were Vorthan shock troops, the elite soldiers, who crushed rebellions across the galaxy. Their armor hummed with contained energy, small lights blinking along the surface like a starship's control panel. Each suit was worth more than most people made in a lifetime, powered by miniature fusion cores that could level city blocks if they overloaded. The shock troops moved with mechanical precision, forming a perfect circle round Ji-hoon and his unconscious wife. The marketplace erupted in panic. Vendors abandoned their stalls and ran for the exits. A family of blue-skinned Altarians dove behind an overturned fruit cart. Even the tough Korgan traders, who usually stood their ground against anything, were backing away fast. Everyone knew what happened when Vorthan shock troops showed up. Someone was about to die. Their weapons were unlike anything most civilians had ever seen. Each rifle was as long as a human arm, with multiple barrels that rotated slowly. Energy crackled between metal coils, creating that high-pitched whine that made people's teeth ache. These guns could fire different types of ammunition, plasma bolts that melted through starship hulls, neural scramblers that shut down entire nervous systems, or concussion blasts that could knock a grown Korgan unconscious from 50 yards away. The lead shock trooper's helmet had no face, just a smooth black surface with a single red sensor that swept back and forth like a predator's eye when it spoke. The voice came from speakers built into its chest armor. "Human citizen Park Ji-hoon," the mechanical voice announced, somehow knowing his name despite never meeting him before. "You have interfered with official Vorthan justice. Resistance will result in immediate termination." Ji-hoon stood perfectly still as 6 deadly weapons pointed at his chest. A normal person would have been begging for mercy or trying to run. But Ji-hoon wasn't normal. And something in his composture made even these elite soldiers hesitate. The red sensor on the leader's helmet focused on him with a soft clicking sound. Advanced scanners were reading his heart rate, brain activity, and stress hormones. What they found confused the artificial intelligence running the suit's systems. Most humans facing certain death showed panic, desperation, or at least elevated anxiety. Ji-hoon's readings were steady as stone. "Your biological responses indicate you are not afraid," the shock trooper observed, sounding genuinely puzzled. "This is unusual. Most humans begin crying or evacuating their bowels when facing our weapons." One of the other soldiers laughed. "A sound like grinding metal. Maybe this one is too stupid to understand death." But their leader was smarter than that. Something wasn't right about this human. In 3 decades of crushing resistance movements, it had learned to recognize dangerous opponents. The truly deadly ones never showed fear. They showed the same cold calculation it was seeing now. Ji-hoon slowly reached into his jacket pocket. 6 weapons immediately adjusted their aim, tracking his movement with computer precision. Power levels increased with rising winds of charging energy. One twitched toward anything that looked like a weapon, and they'd turn him into vapor dot instead. Ji-hoon pulled out a small rectangular card. It looked ordinary enough, just a piece of metal with some writing on it. But as he held it up, the surface began to glow with inner light. Strange symbols appeared across its face, shifting and changing like living code. The shock trooper sensors immediately focused on the card. Advanced scanners tried to read its contents. But the quantum encryption was like nothing in their databases. Military-grade security protocols activated across all 6 suits of armor. Attempting to decode what they were seeing, quantum encrypted military identification, the leader announced to its squad. Accessing Galactic Defense Archives, Ji-hoon looked directly at the lead shock trooper's faceless helmet. His voice was quiet, but carried clearly across the silent marketplace. Every word was measured and calm, like he was discussing the weather. Instead of facing certain death, I am Ghost Company survivor. The effect was immediate and dramatic. All 6 weapons powered down simultaneously with electronic whines fading to silence. The shock troopers' armor systems began flashing warning lights as classified databases came online. Information poured across their helmet displays faster than most species could process. The lead trooper took an actual step backward, something that shocked the watching civilians. Vorthan shock troops never retreated. They were programmed to advance until victory or destruction. But now its red sensor was blinking rapidly, processing data that changed everything. Impossible, the mechanical voice whispered, and for the first time it sounded genuinely afraid. Ghost Company was wiped out at Kepler's Edge 15 years ago. No survivors. Ji-hoon held up the card higher, its glow intensifying. Check again. The lead shock trooper's armor began making sounds nobody had ever heard before. A deep grinding noise like metal being crushed. Inside his crystalline body, stress fractures were actually forming. For a Vorthan to show physical fear, the threat had to be beyond imagination. Data streamed across every helmet display as the military archives opened files that had been classified for over a decade. Ghost Company wasn't just another human military unit. They were legends whispered about in alien war colleges across the galaxy. The unit that had done the impossible at Kepler's Edge, the youngest shock trooper, barely 50 years old by Vorthan standards, had only heard stories. His voice cracked through the suit's speakers. Sir, the files, they can't be real. Humans fighting Void Reapers with rocks and scrap metal. But the older soldiers knew better. They'd studied the battle recordings during their military training. The Kepler line had been humanity's last stand against the most terrifying predators the galaxy had ever known. The Void Reapers were creatures of living shadow and hunger, each one the size of a starship. They consumed entire worlds, turning planets into lifeless husks in days. When the Reapers broke through human space defenses, only Ghost Company stood between them and Earth. 47 soldiers against a swarm of creatures that had destroyed civilizations a million years old. The battle footage was still used in military academies as an example of impossible courage. Ghost Company had fought for 6 days straight without sleep, food, or reinforcements. When their weapons ran out, they made new ones from battlefield scrap. When their ammunition was gone, they used rocks, broken metal, even pieces of their own destroyed equipment. Ji-hoon's service record filled their displays with information that made seasoned warriors question what they thought they knew about humans. At age 19, he'd held a defensive position alone for 18 hours against creatures that could tear through starship armor with their claws. He'd built traps from broken machinery that had killed Reapers weighing thousands of tons. But the most terrifying entry was from the final day of battle, when the last Ghost Company position was about to be overrun. Ji-hoon had done something that military historians still couldn't explain. He'd walked out into the middle of the Reaper swarm, unarmed and alone. The recording was grainy, taken from a damaged satellite miles above the battlefield. A single human figure standing in a crater surrounded by dozens of massive shadow creatures. They could have killed him instantly, but instead they stopped. Ji-hoon had spoken to them for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Then the entire Reaper fleet had simply left. Thousands of world-destroying predators had turned round and disappeared into deep space, never to be seen again. Nobody knew what Ji-hoon had said to them. The audio was too damaged to recover. And he'd never told anyone. The shock trooper scanning the files found another impossible entry. After the battle, Ji-hoon's transport ship had been shot down while returning to Earth. He'd crashed on Zirion 4, a dead world with poisonous atmosphere and deadly radiation. Rescue ships had searched for months but found no survivors. 2 years later, a trading vessel had picked up an emergency beacon from the planet's surface. They'd found Ji-hoon living in a shelter he built from his crashed ship. Wearing clothes made from alien plant fibers, he'd survived by eating radiation moss and drinking filtered toxic water. The planet was supposed to kill any Earth-born life within weeks, but he'd turned it into his home. The medical report from his rescue was equally unbelievable. He'd adapted to breathing the thin atmosphere and developed resistance to radiation. That should have been lethal. His body had changed in ways that scientists still couldn't understand. But the part that made the shock troopers step backward was simpler than any scientific mystery. The psychological profile warned that Ghost Company survivors were extremely protective of civilian lives, especially family members. The report included a single line in bold text: "Under no circumstances should family units be threatened in the presence of surviving personnel." The marketplace had gone completely silent. Even the station's background hum seemed quieter, as if the entire structure was holding its breath. Other aliens who had been watching from safe distances were now fleeing entirely. Word was spreading through the station's communication networks. A Ghost Company veteran was here. The lead shock trooper's voice shook as he accessed more files. "Command, we have a situation. Target is confirmed Ghost Company survivor Ji-hoon, requesting immediate tactical withdrawal." But his commanding officer's response came back immediately through their communication system. "Negative. Maintain position. One human cannot threaten a full shock squad." The trooper looked at his men, then at Ji-hoon standing calmly beside his unconscious wife. The human hadn't moved a muscle. But something in his posture had changed. The same patience that had let him survive alone on a dead world for 2 years was now focused on them. "Sir," the trooper replied to his commander, with respect, "you didn't read the files. This isn't just any human." In the distance, station alarms began sounding. Someone had triggered the emergency protocols. The station's emergency sirens wailed across every level as red lights bathed the marketplace in crimson. Emergency blast doors began sliding shut, sealing off sections of the station. The automated voice system announced in 12 different languages. Code 7 diplomatic incident. All personnel maintain safe distance from Sector 12. Within 30 seconds, the first medical team arrived. Not the usual station medics, but the elite trauma unit reserved for high-ranking officials. They moved with practiced efficiency, their anti-gravity stretcher humming as they approached Minji's unconscious form, the lead medic, a tall insectoid creature with forearms. Immediately began scanning her with advanced equipment. "Null pathway. Damage." The medic clicked in perfect human English. "Severe but treatable. We need to get her to the medical bay immediately." Ji-hoon knelt beside his wife, gently brushing hair from her face. "Will she be okay? The Ghost Company veterans family receives our finest care. The medic replied, clearly having been briefed on the situation. "I guarantee a full recovery." Behind them, the shock troopers had formed a protective circle, their weapons now pointed outward instead of at Ji-hoon. They'd switched from enemies to bodyguards in less than 5 minutes. The marketplace was being evacuated by additional security teams who treated the entire area like a crime scene. The air above them shimmered, and suddenly a massive hologram appeared. The Vorthon governor stood 12 feet tall, his crystalline body glowing with internal light. His presence filled the space with an almost electrical energy that made the air taste like metal. Honored veteran Park Ji-hoon, the governor's voice boomed through speakers hidden throughout the station. "I'm Governor Dakshin, supreme authority of the Outer Rim colonies. Please accept my deepest apologies for this inexcusable incident." 3 more holograms materialized around him. A sleek, blue-skinned Altarian admiral whose uniform was covered in medals. A massive Korgan general whose tusks were decorated with golden rings, and most surprisingly, a human diplomatic envoy from Earth's colonial authority. The human envoy stepped forward, his face pale with worry. "Mr. Park, I'm Ambassador Williams. Earth Command is sending a full diplomatic team. We had no idea you were living in the outer colonies." Ji-hoon stood slowly, his eyes never leaving the medical team working on Minji. "I came here for peace. My wife and I just wanted a quiet life." Governor Dakshin's hologram flickered as he accessed more files. "Your service record indicates you were offered the highest honors from 17 different species. After the Kepler Line victory, you refused them all and disappeared." "I didn't fight for honors," Ji-hoon replied quietly. "I fought so people could live normal lives." The Altarian admiral spoke up, her voice carrying the respect of a lifetime soldier. "The Academy still teaches the Battle of Kepler's Edge. Your tactical improvisation saved billions of lives across the galaxy." Round them, more officials were arriving, not in person, but through quantum communication links that created shimmering portals in the air. A council of elders from the Peaceful Worlds Alliance, representatives from the Traders Guild, even a delegation from the mysterious Zenith Empire, who rarely spoke to anyone. The Korgan general's tusks gleamed as he spoke in his booming voice. "In my culture, we honor warriors above all others, but Ghost Company transcends warrior status. You are legends given flesh." The station's medical bay reported through the communication system. "Patient is stable and responding to treatment. Full recovery expected within 6 hours." Ji-hoon's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you. That's all I wanted." But the diplomatic representatives weren't done. They understood the implications of what had happened. A Ghost Company veteran had been threatened on a major trade station. Word would spread throughout the galaxy within hours. Every species would be asking the same questions. How safe were humans in alien space? What happened to the protection agreements? Ambassador Williams pulled up a holographic display showing star charts. "Mr. Park, this incident has already reached Earth Command. The President is personally reviewing our colonial protection policies, and the Galactic Council is calling an emergency session," added the Altarian Admiral. "Ghost Company veterans are protected under the Kepler Accords. Threatening one is considered an act of war." Governor Dakshin's form darkened with embarrassment. "The officers responsible will face full legal consequences. But I must ask, what would prevent this from becoming a larger diplomatic crisis?" Ji-hoon looked round at all the powerful beings hanging on his words. Admirals, generals, governors, and ambassadors all waiting for his decision. Just hours ago, he'd been a simple station security officer. Now, he was at the center of galactic politics. "I don't want anyone punished," he said finally. "I want better training. Your officers didn't know how to handle human civilians. They need to understand that we're not just another species, the Zenith Empire's representative, a figure made of pure light. Spoke for the first time. The human requests wisdom over vengeance. This confirms the legends we have heard. From across the station, Jihoon could see shuttles arriving, diplomatic vessels from dozens of worlds, all rushing to what had become the most important location in the galaxy. The changes started immediately, within 24 hours of the incident. Emergency shipments of training materials were being loaded onto cargo vessels across the galaxy. The fastest courier ships in known space carried new protocols to every colonial outpost, military base, and trading station. Jihoon stood in the main conference room of Colony Station Alpha 7, watching through the massive viewing windows as ship after ship arrived. Each vessel brought specialists, trainers, and officials who would reshape how aliens interacted with human civilians forever. Minji sat beside him, fully recovered, but now wearing a small silver badge that identified her as a veteran spouse. The badge was connected to every security database in the galaxy. Any scanner that read it would immediately display warnings about diplomatic immunity and protected status. "It's strange," she said, watching a massive Korgan warship dock at the station. 3 months ago, nobody knew we existed. Now half the galaxy is here because of us. The first major change came from the Vorthan Empire itself. Governor Vexin had personally overseen the creation of new training centers on 15 different worlds. Every Vorthan security officer would now spend 6 weeks learning about human psychology, family structures, and emotional responses. The training videos were remarkable to watch. Vorthan instructors, normally as emotionless as machines, were learning to recognize human facial expressions and body language. They practiced scenarios where humans might react protectively to threats against their families. Most importantly, they learned that human irrational behavior was often perfectly logical once you understood human values. The officers who had attacked Minji were reassigned to a research station orbiting a dead star. It wasn't exactly punishment. They were helping to catalog stellar phenomena, but it meant they'd never interact with civilians again. The message was clear. Abuse of power had consequences. But the real changes went far beyond training programs. The Galactic Trade Commission established new rules for all commercial stations. Human family units were given special protection status. Any security action involving humans required approval from specially trained supervisors. Emergency medical teams had to include medics trained in human physiology. Jihoon's new office was 3 times larger than his old security post, as the official human-alien relations coordinator. He reviewed every incident involving human civilians across the Outer Rim colonies. His recommendations carried weight that surprised even him. Just last week, he'd prevented a diplomatic crisis on mining station Beta 9. A group of Altarian workers had complained about human miners working too loudly. The local administrator wanted to fine the humans for noise violations. Jihoon's report explained that humans often sang or talked while working as a way to build team unity and maintain morale. The Altarians were relocated to quieter sections of the station instead. The most dramatic change happened on Frontier World 7, where human settlers had been struggling with local Korgan authorities over land use rights. The Korgan saw the human practice of growing decorative flowers as wasteful of valuable farming space. Tensions had been building for months. When Jihoon arrived to mediate, he brought something unexpected: recordings from Earth showing how human gardens weren't just decoration, but important for mental health and community building. The Korgans, who valued efficiency above all else, suddenly understood that human inefficiency actually made humans work better in the long run. The solution was elegant. Humans were given additional land specifically for gardens and recreational spaces. In return, They shared their agricultural techniques that increased crop yields by 30%. Both species benefited. Stories like this spread throughout the galaxy. The park protocols weren't just rules. They were a new way of thinking about interspecies relations, instead of forcing everyone to follow the same standards. The protocols encouraged understanding different species' needs and motivations. Military academies across known space now required courses on human tactical thinking, not because they wanted to fight humans, but because they wanted to understand how humans approached problems differently. The lesson of Ghost Company wasn't about superior firepower or technology. It was about never giving up when protecting. Something important. Young officers learned about improvisation, adaptability, and the psychological power of absolute determination. Some academies even created simulation programs where cadets had to survive on hostile worlds using only basic tools, trying to understand how Ji-hoon had lasted 2 years on Zirion 4. The most touching change came from an unexpected source, the Zenith Empire. Mysterious beings of pure energy who rarely interacted with physical species established a new tradition every year on the anniversary of the Kepler Line battle. They would project a light display visible from hundreds of worlds. The lights formed the symbol of Ghost Company, not as a memorial to war, but as a celebration of sacrifice for others. Children across the galaxy now grew up hearing bedtime stories about the human soldiers who fought impossible odds to protect people they'd never met. The stories always ended the same way. And that's why we never give up when someone we love needs help. Minji often laughed about their new status. We wanted a quiet retirement, and instead we became the most famous couple in 3-star systems. But Ji-hoon knew the real victory wasn't the fame or the protocols or the diplomatic immunity. It was simpler than that. Last week, he'd watched a young human family walk through the marketplace where Minji had been attacked. The children were laughing and playing while their parents shopped peacefully. Nobody stopped them. Nobody questioned their right to be there. Nobody threatened them with null disruptors for walking in curved lines. The 5 words that had stopped a SWAT team, "I am Ghost Company survivor," had become something bigger. They'd become a promise that echoed across the stars. Humans would always stand up for each other, no matter the odds. The end.